Enjoy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, who have joined us via the various social media channels, on Facebook, on YouTube, and also via the Dr. Fundi channel. Today, we are going to be looking, or we'll be discussing, how South Africa has responded to this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic so far. A lot of commentators have actually, congratulated South Africa at how South Africa has dealt with this pandemic, looking at where our government was projecting the numbers by the middle of last week and where we actually are in reality, just over 1,600 cases. Now, yesterday, a colleague of mine who is based in Germany, he actually made a comment, where he was actually very impressed with how South Africa is actually handling the pandemic. And flowing from, his posts on social media, we had private discussions because I was interested to, hear what he has to say deeper than what he had put on social media. And so that guest that we're still waiting for now is Dr. Marvin Maestri. Dr. Marvin Maestri, he was my classmate at medical school from 1984 to 1989. So we qualified together. We qualified together in 1989. All right. So he's just connecting with us right now. You'll see him shortly.
Hi, Fundile.
Hey, hi, Mev. How are you? I can't see you. Hey, Mevin. Hey, Mev. All right. He's still trying to connect with us, but just to introduce who he is. He is.
I'm very well, thank you.
Hey, Mev, you disappeared there. Hey, Mev.
Yeah, I'm here.
Your line doesn't seem to be good. You're breaking up. Where is there a way that you could maybe get to where you've got a bigger strength in terms of your connectivity? Hey, Mev. All right. Whilst we're trying to get Mev sorted out, I was just still introducing him. He is a qualified medical doctor. We qualified together in 1989. He worked in Cape Town and decided that he's leaving clinical medicine. And so he did an MBA and branched out completely from clinical medicine. He did an MBA, I think it's Stellenbosch, if I'm not mistaken. And he then had a new career in investment banking. And so he spent a lot of time working for top global firms in investment banking. However, a few years ago, he then decided he's going on his own. And so he started a company that is called Convit. Convit that deals with issues of cryptocurrencies and other things. But he will explain to us what exactly he does in his company. But today, I'm not asking him to come here to talk about cryptocurrencies, but I actually am interested in his analysis of how South Africa is doing with regards to managing the COVID-19 pandemic. Yesterday, like I said, he had very positive views about how South Africa is doing. And I just want to go deeper. When we were speaking yesterday, he actually told me that within his organization, he has tasked some of his analysts to look at how South Africa is dealing with the pandemic, comparing it with Taiwan, So for me, I'm interested to know why Taiwan and what have been the findings. But beyond that comparison with Taiwan, I want us to also look at the country where he is right now, Germany. You know, what does he think of how Germany has handled this pandemic? You know, and also other countries in Europe, those in the south of Europe, Italy, Spain, and France, but also those in the north of Europe, you know, like Sweden. I want to hear, you know, what he thinks of the various approaches that they have taken. So, Merv, are you available? Hi, Mervin. All right, I'm not sure why we don't seem to have Mervin on the line, because he had managed to come through, but the line was a bit weak. So I had asked him to move to where he's got the higher strength. But at this moment, he has not come back to us. Mervin? All right, it seems to be quite a challenge, but let me hope that he's trying to connect. My interest and what motivated this interview or discussion with him is the fact that Europe, especially the countries in the south of Europe, Italy, you know, France and Spain, they seem to be having a major challenge in terms of dealing with this COVID-19 epidemic. If we look at Italy on its own, Italy, the number of people that are dying from COVID-19 in Italy is very high. At the moment, Italy has the most number of people who have died as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. On the other hand, the US, on the other side of the Atlantic, has got the most number of people who are infected by COVID-19, you know, pandemic. And a country like Spain, a country like France, they are not very far behind Italy and Spain. So I'm interested to know, why is it that the Southern European countries seem to be struggling when, you know, countries like Germany, they seem to be doing a little bit better than their Southern counterparts. And also when one looks at a country in the Nordic part of Europe, like Sweden, their approach seems to be totally different to the approach taken by this, you know, by the rest of the European countries. Up until recently, I had not read anything about them actually going on a lockdown, whilst most countries in Europe have gone to have a lockdown as a way of flattening the curve. The approach by Sweden, totally different, to the dismay of many of their citizens, because somehow there's a thinking that they would rather expose people to this virus so that they can actually get their own, you know, innate immunity, which I feel it's a very dangerous approach. I feel it's an, you know, I liken it to playing Russian roulette. But you know, it's an approach that they've chosen, and I'm not sure if it is the right approach. And when one looks at Italy, they have got their unique risk before the pandemic, and that unique risk was that they've got a huge percentage of their population that is made up of people who one can actually consider to be the elderly. And we know that the people that are considered the elderly are actually high risk when it comes to, you know, COVID-19 infection. And so a lot of the people that are actually becoming victims of dying from COVID-19 in Italy seems to be, you know, a lot of them are people who are older or those with pre-existing health conditions like lung problems from smoking, you know, and other, you know, challenges. And also the other problem with Italy is that they took long to actually take drastic steps against, you know, this, you know, pandemic. And the weeks that they lost in terms of flattening the curve, they are paying a huge price in terms of the lives of their people that are being lost. And so those are the things that are of interest to me. Let me just check on Dr. Maestri again. Marvin?
I'm here. Unfortunately, my bandwidth seems to be quite low. Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you. So maybe we can just talk, welcome to our platform, Dr. Maestri. Thank you for making time to share with us, your thoughts and insights around the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, before you connected with us, I just shared with our viewers who are, following us on various social media platforms. I just shared with them that, you had very positive things to say about how South Africa has managed the pandemic so far. And flowing from that, I actually made contact, with you with a view to inviting you to share those sentiments here. And you actually advised me that your company has been doing an analysis looking at South Africa and Taiwan. And you were looking at having some of the insights, before we have the interview today. But before we get to that, maybe you can just tell people what you do, what does CONVID, do in Berlin, just as an intro before we get to the Taiwan-South Africa issue.
Okay. Fundile, thank you for inviting me. So maybe just a brief introduction about Confidio.
Yes.
Basically, we are a blockchain venture studio, and we are looking at how the blockchain be used in the real economy. I think that's probably the summary of what we do. In addition, I also run a crypto fund where we invest in a lot of the cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin and Ethereum. And part of that, what we're looking at is what impact will the current crisis have on cryptocurrencies and just on investment in general.
Yes.
So we were also looking at which particular countries are handling the pandemic well, because what will happen is those countries that handle the pandemic well will probably see the value of their currencies rise. And that's the basis of the research that we're doing.
Yes. So just before we get to that comparison, in terms of the space that you are in, then, around tracking, the issue of, cryptocurrencies and the currencies, the strength and the weakness and all of that, what insights can you share with our people?
So I think what in this crisis, of course, we've seen the value of asset prices, at least on the stock market, plummet.
Yes.
And part related to that, I think, is the realization that the current virus,
yes,
immunity, current lockdown will prevent the situation from getting worse. It is by no means a solution.
Yes.
And this means that we are probably going to be in a period of instability and uncertainty. My guess would be anything from 1 to 3 years.
Yes.
While we develop herd immunity. But in order to develop that, it means that a large proportion of the world's population has got to get the disease.
Yeah. I'm listening. Yes, we're listening.
Yeah. And so as a result, we think that the current crisis, apart from being of course, a disaster, it also presents people with a opportunity for reshaping economies and reshaping the world that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people have finally realized just how valuable medical doctors actually are.
Yeah.
Coming back to the comment I made about the South African Minister of Health, I think he's been one of the most impressive ministers of health because he knows what he's talking about.
Yes.
If you look at the other ministers of health, they're mainly politicians. Some of them have a degree in political science or have a degree in marketing, but have absolutely no understanding of healthcare or epidemiology.
Yes.
And that's when we start seeing that competence and qualifications can actually save lives.
Yes. 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 And so, getting back then to the analysis that your guys, your analysts have been doing, comparing South Africa's response to the Taiwan response. My first question is, why Taiwan?
So Taiwan, in my opinion, is one of the countries that has managed the crisis the best. Simply because I think it's a number of reasons for this. Taiwan has experience with handling flu epidemics, if you like. Yeah? They've had to deal with SARS. I was actually working in Hong Kong when the first epidemic broke out. And in there, they've learned how to manage the population. So you have a number of hygienic measures already in place. People in Taiwan started wearing masks immediately. And the government managed social distancing and the lockdown extremely firmly and fast. In addition, I think they're very close to China. So the reason that they acted so fast was probably because of how close they were to China. But if you look at it, you can see that at the moment, Taiwan has got around 373 confirmed cases and only 5 deaths so far. So it managed extremely well in a fairly highly densely populated country. I think that's one thing. The second thing about compared to South Africa is South Africa has also managed the lockdown fairly aggressively and fairly fast. Which I think has been very much to its credit. And so in our opinion, I think the 3 countries that have handled the pandemic the best have been Germany, Taiwan, and South Africa.
You're not saying that just because Germany is your host country, huh?
No, that's not the reason. But I think it also shows leadership because you've got a chancellor. The chancellor of Germany is actually a scientist. She's not a marketing person. She's not a political science graduate. She is actually a scientist. So she understands epidemiology. She understands data. She understands evidence. And I think on the world stage, she certainly stands out as someone who doesn't beat about the bush.
Now, just about Germany, there's 2 things I thought I was going to ask you during this interview. The first one is that there is a finance minister who has just committed suicide there in Germany as a result of the stress related to the handling of this. The other one is the issue around how Germany records deaths. Somebody was saying in Germany, the deaths that are recorded in a way that's different to the rest of the world, in that if somebody dies of pneumonia, they'll just say pneumonia. They won't count it as pneumonia related to COVID-19, so they will look at the exact cause of death, respiratory failure, multi-organ failure, but not link it to the underlying problem. Is that a fair comment around because then they were saying the numbers are low when it comes to deaths because some of the deaths that are related to COVID-19 are actually not recorded as such. Is it an informed comment, or it's just people who are trying to downplay the success of what Germany has done in managing this pandemic?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I have a few opinions on that. I think you look across the globe, and what is quite clear is that there is not a unified response to the pandemic, either in the collection of data, in prevention mechanisms. So firstly, I think that's one thing that will change post the pandemic. The comment that Germany is underreporting the number of deaths, I think is I would not agree with that. I think there definitely is a discrepancy, but you see that same discrepancy even in the US, for example. So in the US, if someone dies outside of hospital and they do not have a confirmed coronavirus diagnosis, they will not be part of the number of deaths recorded. So I think, and then there's an article in the Washington Post from yesterday which actually goes to that quite well. And I think in Germany, I would say that risk is limited simply because Germany has been testing in large numbers from the beginning. So there's less likelihood that someone who's sick actually did not manage to get tested. So for me, that risk is more likely to be seen in the UK or the US, where testing is really quite abysmal, to be absolutely frank.
So,
and then the finance minister who committed suicide, South Africa is pretty much like Germany in that regard, because South Africa is divided into a number of different provinces or regions. And each region has their own premier and their own finance minister. And the finance minister, a chap called Schaefer, Thomas Schaefer, he was the finance minister of one of the regional states within Germany. And that is true. He committed suicide apparently because of the stress related to COVID-19. I suppose German politicians take their role quite seriously.
All right. So just something you just mentioned now, Merv, the fact that Germany has been doing a lot of testing. I'm informed that most of the reagents that are used, in the process of testing for COVID-19 are actually, supplied by Germany. So would that be the reason why, they have an advantage because they are producing these things here at home? That's just a question. You don't have to answer it. Hey, Merv?
No, I don't think that's the case, Fundi, because I think it's a political decision and a public health decision. I think the decision to test was taken as a political and a public health decision, because I think in the US, for example, they used initially a CDC test, which had a number of false positives associated with or false negatives. And as a result, I think it was, apart from the fact that the political leadership in the US is virtually non-existent.
All right. And then, a country like Sweden, a few weeks ago, I was reading about their approach, which seems to be very different from the rest of the continent, in Europe, where they have not implemented any lockdown. They have not closed any schools. And they are talking about what you mentioned earlier, the herd immunity. Can you just maybe talk about that, just expand, what is this herd immunity, philosophy?
So, I mean, the concept is the virus is brand new, which means there is no existing immunity. And of course, you can see that simply by the the acceleration and the speed of the spread.
Yeah.
And over the next few years, human beings have got to develop some immunity against the virus. And that's the concept, as you know, from epidemiology, the concept of herd immunity.
Yeah.
And that's going to take a number of years to develop. So I don't think it's going to develop. Sweden's going to play a huge role in helping that to develop. The UK also had a very similar strategy at the beginning, and people started dying. Yeah. The main reason for the shutdown now is to, I think, prevent the breakdown in the public health system or the health systems, and by extension preventing a breakdown in the economic system. Yeah. Because I mean the economic system is also at risk as a result of public health.
Yeah.
So this is a measure, I think, that is to help governments and to help public health officials manage the pandemic.
Yes.
Over the next period, over the next 1 to 3 years, we're going to see a number of other measures to try and manage the level of illness and the impact on the economy. So this herd immunity, and then the concept is once herd immunity reaches about 60 or 70% of the population, the disease is no longer as dangerous. Of course, there are a number of assumptions behind this. The main assumption being that the virus does not mutate.
Yeah. And we've seen that this
the
coronavirus
second assumption is that at some stage. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, Mev?
Yes. The second one is that it will take, at the best case scenario, we're looking at getting a vaccine in 12 to 18 months.
Yes.
I think this is another point I wanted to bring up, because what I have really been looking at, you know, and you know probably more than most, I'm African completely, even though I live in Germany. Yeah. So I've been watching South Africa very closely. And one of the things that is interesting is the lack of the number of deaths. Yeah. The second thing is the fact that it's not spreading as fast. Certainly in the Western Cape, I've looked at that one case in Khayelitsha, which was diagnosed 3 or 4 days ago, and there has not been a rapid increase since then. Yeah.
Assuming that the contacts
there
have
has
been,
not
you
been
know,
a rapid
have been
increase
traced.
since then. Well, the interesting thing is South Africa is much more advanced in the number of tests they have done compared to most other places. So if you look at California, for example, they've conducted about 120,000 tests, and they had their first COVID-19 diagnosis in January. South Africa had the first COVID diagnosis on around March the 5th. And I think you already have about 55,000 tests. So testing is not the problem in South Africa. And once again, I think that's got to do with the fact that the Minister of Health is actually a medical doctor from a very good medical school, by the way.
You had to throw that in, eh? Your alma mater.
And so I don't think that testing is the issue. The other thing is there is a lot of research being done about the anti-TB vaccine.
I was going to ask about that one.
We have all got the
BCG vaccine.
Camille Durand, the French microbiologist. And so all of us have it, and it may be one of the reasons that the
death rate is not
the
as
level
high.
of illness is not as high. Now, of course, it'd be wonderful if that is the case. It's probably too early to tell, but I had a look at the figures. South Africa's death rate from 2 or 3 days ago is up 0%. So there's not been an increase. There were 2. So it's extremely low. The number of
100,000 population.
So it is extremely low. Of course,
but it's still early days, though. We're still gonna face our winter here.
That's actually a very important point. We're moving into the flu season.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas in Europe, we are moving out of the flu season.
Exactly.
So whether that has a role to play or not. Sorry,
yeah, we're
go
listening.
ahead.
Yeah, no,
I
was going to say.
Play or not.
Hey, Mervyn.
Yes.
Mervyn.
I can hear you.
Yes, I was going to ask, with regards to this information, around the seeming protection, from a BCG vaccination point of view, what is being advanced by scientists there? What is it that that vaccine gives that enables us to have a lower death rate? I'm still, I've been trying to follow that as well, but I haven't really got a good article that takes me deeper into the thinking behind what they think is the protection.
So at the moment, it seems like a more broad-based respiratory protection, and that the BCG may give a fairly generic protection.
Yeah.
That is the hypothesis that has not been proven.
Yeah.
There are, at the moment, the Max Planck Institute in Germany is currently looking at developing an advanced version of such a vaccine.
Yeah.
Of course, I think everywhere in the world, the epidemiologists are probably looking in South Africa and thinking, why is it not growing as rapidly as we anticipated? Because when people look at Africa, generally they tend to think of only in terms of disaster. So the first thing you hear is this public health system is overrun, TB, a high HIV infection.
Can you repeat your point?
So everyone.
Can you repeat your point? There was a bit of a break there.
South African situation to explode.
Yeah. Yes.
So, with regard to the South African situation, anywhere in Africa, and they think the public health system is overrun.
Yeah. Yes. Mervyn? Hey, Mervyn? Mervyn? We seem to be having challenges again with connectivity from Germany. Who would have thought that South Africa would have a stable connection? And in Germany, in Berlin, we have a connection that's a bit unstable. Sometimes it takes going out of South Africa to actually be aware that things don't always work in the countries that we believe are the most developed. Dr. Maestri, are you there? All right. So, hi, Mervyn. I see he's trying to connect again with us. We'll give him a few minutes. Now, I mean, another interesting matter.
Okay.
Hi, Mervyn. That's better.
Hi.
We can even see you now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, you see, right. All right. Anyway, you were still making a point.
What I was saying earlier, generally what's been happening is, of course, we've had a pretty, the Italy and Spain has been a disaster. America is currently a disaster. And people were saying generally, by the time it gets to Africa, it's going to be a massive disaster.
Yeah.
The public health systems are not working properly. Well, South Africa's got a very high HIV rate. There's a very
Yeah.
high tuberculosis rate. And so it's going to be an absolute tinderbox. It's going to explode.
Yeah.
And so generally people are always making the worst predictions when it comes to Africa. And now those predictions have not come true.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I mean, I hope they don't come true. And it might be early days yet. People are starting to ask the question, South Africa has now had nearly a month of COVID-19 without the massive spread that has occurred elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the question has to be why, because the truth is, in the townships in South Africa, there is quite a bit of overcrowding. You've got a number of people in a single room. And so if the disease was going to spread rapidly, it should have started by now.
But isn't it that as a result, is that not as a result that maybe the people who stay in the townships and the informal settlements don't travel as much, which is why where I am in Johannesburg, in Sandton, we are actually in the epicenter because it's got the most mobile people, in the country.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one aspect, but international transmission is now, I think, generally a more secondary version. Local transmission is taking over in most places in the world.
Yes.
So that definitely is an aspect, and it could be that the virus has not really taken hold, which would be unlikely just looking at what has happened elsewhere. The temperature itself could not have been a major issue because the virus spread quite rapidly in places like Singapore and Australia,
which are not necessarily cold.
Quite warm. Exactly. So I think it's early days, and we all have hypotheses. And it's interesting that that the disaster that was predicted has not happened. It could also be that the extremely efficient response by the South African government and the Minister of Health has played quite a large role.
Yes, I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. So if we now cross the Atlantic and just look at our friend, okay, not friend in the literal sense, but, we look at how the government of Trump has actually dealt with this matter. What insights or thoughts do you have around how that country has actually, dealt with the pandemic, considering that they now have the most number of people who are COVID-19 positive in the rest of the world?
I mean, that's a very interesting question. So I can give you a personal story. I have a very close friend in the US who I spoke to roughly about an hour before this call, and she is diagnosed with COVID-19.
Yes.
And she's in the high risk group. And she's been ill for the last 3 weeks. She's been to the doctor 3 times. And he's only been told to self-isolate 1 week ago.
Wow. So for 3 weeks, she potentially was, infectious, possibly.
Yes. Yeah. And then you also got the cases where you have those cruise ship passengers getting off the plane, having a temperature, coughing all over the place, and actually being allowed to enter one of the world's busiest airports, and then get onto planes and fly to the rest of the US. So I think it's one of the sort of moving into a political discussion. It's one of the clear reasons I think that the free market is actually not the answer to everything, because what's very clear here is the lack of public health leadership and the lack of actually just leadership is really quite striking in the US.
Yeah.
What's also quite striking is that a lot of the people who vote in the US don't seem to be bothered by the fact that they continue to support incompetent leaders, which is beyond me. But I mean, this is the subject of another discussion. But it does border, from a public health point of view, I think it's not borders on criminal. It actually is quite obviously criminal the way the Trump administration is handling this. And you've got people like Jared Kushner, for example, who has zero qualifications in anything, let alone healthcare. And you're asking someone who is clearly incompetent, clearly unqualified, to actually be part of a response like this. And that sort of playing Russian roulette with the lives of your citizens is something you would not expect in a democracy at all.
Yeah. Now, Mev, let's just go back, man, to the South Africa-Taiwan story. We touched on it briefly, but what other insights, or findings did your team, share with you in that comparison that you guys were doing? You were hoping to get some of the, findings before this interview.
I mean, so what we certainly did what we did find out was that the Taiwan response has been incredibly effective, because one of the things we have been looking at as well is the population density, the number of people per square kilometer. And in a viral situation, the population density should be one of the indicators indicating rapid spread. Now, Taiwan has an extremely high population density without that rapid spread, which I think is another reason to say that they handled it extremely well. From an economic point of view, what we have looked at is what could be a possible economic advantage is that Taiwan's economy will be able to open up sooner than possible for other economies. Interestingly enough, I had a discussion with Bradley Borders, who's an economics lecturer at UCT, to say that if South Africa has handled this epidemic quite well, it could be a way to see what advantages the economy can get from it.
Yes.
Which means that the economy
we can do with some advantages this side.
It could mean that the economy could return to normal much more quickly than predicted. But this is something that will be able to be discussed in the next 1 or 2 weeks. I think one of the other things that South Africa could do is, I think the Minister of Health could think about doing something like making sure every single foreigner who lives in the country gets the BCG vaccine. It's an extremely safe vaccine. And so the downside is completely limited. And at the worst case is that it's a waste of the cost of the vaccine. The best case is that we limit spread in the future. And morbidity. So there are some things like that where I think the important thing in any pandemic is to do no harm. Anything that you can do which could have a possible advantage and do no harm, I think that's something to look at. The other thing that's if things keep on going as well as they are at the moment, even though it's early days, one of the things that could happen is that South Africa could return its economy to normal much more quickly than other economies, and that could have advantages for. I mean, you probably need someone at the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry, to look to see how you could get some strategic advantage out of it. This is what's being done in Germany as well. I mean, the advantage of Germany is that, as you said, they make all the reagents. China's doing the same thing. They're producing gloves and masks for the rest of the world. So and just like after any war, a country economic system has got to look to see where the advantages are.
Yeah.
This is sort of consulting work I used to do at Accenture and EY for a long time. So it's just about how strategically to take advantage of what's going on. And so if South Africa, and I certainly hope that's the case, that the epidemic is being handled extremely well, and there are some innate advantages in the immunity, and that the number of deaths are really as low as they currently appear to be, then I think it could be a way to look at the economic advantage.
Yeah, yes, that's good. Now, I'm leaving this country last because a lot of people in South Africa and in the continent in general have been very upset. There's two doctors in France who were, had a discussion, and one of them glibly just mentioned that, we need to go and test a vaccine in Africa. But in a way like, there's a large, testing pool where there will be no consequences if anything goes wrong. What are your thoughts about the irresponsible manner in which those French scientists, handled this matter, because people across the continent are very upset. Some of the top soccer players like Didier Drogba have actually, challenged the French government around that. So this idea that, is that dark continent, we can go and just test things there and there will be no consequence. What are your thoughts?
So I had the misfortune to actually see that interview. Yeah. And so personally, I think that just made me furious.
Yeah.
And so I think the fury is completely understandable because it's the 21st century. So you'd expect well-educated people in a country like France to actually know better. Of course, they're now coming up with all sorts of excuses, but for me, that is completely unforgivable. And personally, I think that the French medical authorities or the governing bodies should take some sort of action, even if it's just a sanction. That's the one thing. Then on a more sort of rational level, you've got to understand, I think, that that's how the current world works. This is what pharmaceutical companies have been doing for decades. And this is one of the areas where I think where the blockchain could really be fantastic, is because that's fine. Test on people. You test a vaccine on someone, you know what the identity is. When that vaccine is successful and the pharmaceutical company starts making profits, that profit should be shared with all the people that you've done the tests on, because they are the reason for your success. But this glib notion of tested people, you don't even know who they are, they will receive no benefit in the future, is really, it's an imperialist, colonialist attitude that, I think if I was on that show with these guys, I probably would have got up and hit him with a chair or something. Really, just a shocking thing, in the 21st century context.
All right. So, but on the other side, and this is something that I just posted on my Facebook page to say, you know what, African scientists, that is scientists from the continent of Africa, and I'm not talking here about race, but people who are residing in this continent, who do their work in this continent. Maybe we also need to raise our level of involvement in coming up with solutions to the problems that are afflicting, the population of Africa. And here I think about people like Bongani Mayosi, the late Bongani Mayosi, who was able to mobilize funds and ensure that relevant research that deals with the problems of Africa are actually, done. And the other, world-class researcher that we lost last week, Prof. Geeta Ramji, also when she was leading the HIV prevention unit of the Medical Research Council, she got to a point where she was globally recognized. She could be able to mobilize funds to do research that is relevant to the African continent. So even in the issue of vaccine development for many diseases, including this COVID-19, I think there needs to be a stepping up so that, yes, we have to collaborate with the rest of the world, but let's initiate things. Let's do things that will also, ensure that we are not only the consumers of other people's, ideas, but we are actually able to also contribute new knowledge, new body of knowledge and IP out there. That's just my view. And I just want to take you up on that to say, what do you think about, that?
On that point, I'm in 100% agreement with you. I think that has got to be a well-constructed policy. It can't be ad hoc.
Yes.
And this is one of the areas where the loss of someone like Bongani just hits us really hard. But having said that, I think we must look at how we get some leadership in the scientific community,
Yes.
where we participate in global programs, not as people who things are done to, but as co-initiators, as co-authors, as co-architects of strategies. And one of the things is, if vaccines are to be developed, if pharmacological agents are to be developed, that those molecules, the ownership of those molecules, reside in Africa. Yeah?
Yes.
And in the past, people have said that's too complicated, there's no technology for it, etc. And that's one of the areas where I think a technology like the blockchain comes in handy extremely well, because we can engage scientists and engage patients. And when something is successful, we can reward them all, so that profits don't consistently get repatriated to Europe and America.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. No, I hear you, Merv. As we are wrapping up, is there anything that you wish to just talk about? We have 5 minutes to go, to make up for the first 20 minutes where we could not see you. Is there anything that's in your mind and you wish, I need to share this with my homies back in Africa?
Yeah. I mean, so, one of the things that is extremely positive for me is to see that you have that in South Africa, that we actually have the quality of leadership to respond to a global crisis. Now, that is something I think that for many years, and if you speak to South Africans generally, South Africans at the moment, in my opinion, see the world as a glass half full, or half empty rather. So they tend to be negative about many things. I think one of the things that is extremely heartening at the moment is to see the quality of leadership step up when you really have lives at stake.
Yeah.
And for me, that's really and not just because I'm a graduate of the Natal Medical School and that the Minister of Health is a graduate of the same medical school. That's of course very nice, but it's really impressive to see that leadership and the fact that people's lives are being taken seriously.
Yes.
in many countries of the world, that's understandable. But if you look at how Boris Johnson in the US and the UK handled it,
In the UK.
if you look how Trump is handling it, if you look at how Bolsonaro in Brazil is handling it, you realize that it's not completely understandable that politicians work for the well-being of their people.
Yeah.
And so that's one point that I have certainly been quite pleased to see.
Yeah.
So just
no, those are, I think that's a nice way to close our discussion, Merv. Thank you very much. We had some technical challenges at the beginning, but it's all good as we wrap up. We can see your nicely trimmed beard. Yeah, but anyway, thank you, Merv. We appreciate your contribution. After COVID-19, when all has settled down, I will cross to you again to maybe talk to us about the role of cryptocurrencies, the role of blockchain in the healthcare space. There's a lot of issues relating to corruption that happens, and I do know that blockchain is one of those technologies that actually cuts down, a lot of that kind of thing. So I will reach out to you once the whole COVID-19 has been dealt with, so that you can share a little bit your experiences of deploying those blockchain solutions to the Berlin municipality and other clients that you guys have deployed them in. But that's for the future. Thank you very much for spending time with us. And we wish you well, and make sure that you keep that safe distance, and do all the things that need to be done so that you are COVID-19 free. All right, so thank you very much to our viewers. Sorry for the earlier technical glitches, but I hope we made up in the second half, with a much more clearer type of, engagement. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Fundile. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Stay well.
All right.